Well, hello everyone. I'm Laura Hammond. I'm the Pro-Director of Research and Knowledge Exchange here at SOAS, and I'm really glad to welcome you to SOAS. Every year during Somali Week, we try to host at least one event, and we always ask for the best event to be held here. So here you are, and we got what we wanted this year again. So thank you, Ayan and the team, for all of your work at organizing an amazing Somali Week. Not just tonight, but every night this week. Fantastic. Yet again, I don't know where you guys get the energy for it, but it's amazing. And tonight we have a really special event of a kind of conversation with Nuur Hassan and Nadifa Mohamed, both writers and thinkers and creative people. We're going to learn more about their work in a few minutes. So just the kind of structure of how we thought we would organize tonight. I have a few questions to ask them, and they have, I think, some things that they would like to read, short passages to read from their work for us, and then you'll have a chance to ask them questions or to have some conversation with them. Okay, great. So we'll start. I just want to start by introducing both of them properly, actually. So Nuur Hassan is a Somali-born British author and educator with extensive experience in teaching and learning, and he works in curriculum development and management in further and higher education. He's done a lot of writing as well. His PhD looked at Somali families in the diaspora and the importance of parental involvement in their children's well-being, and he's published his thesis and now has a new book called Between a Rock and a Hard Place, a Somali Boy Growing Up in Minnesota, Family, Schooling, and Identity. And I think there's some copies outside, so grab one while you can. And Nuur will probably be reading, I think, a passage from that book. He has a bachelor's degree in computer studies from London South Bank University, an MSc in systems analysis from the University of London, and the doctorate in which he looked at Somali families was in education from the University of Greenwich. And he's now serving as the head of curriculum at North Kent College. And then Nadifa Mohamed, many of you will know, has been a regular visitor to Somali Week, but is a best-selling author of 3 novels, Black Mamba Boy, The Orchard of Lost Souls, and The Fortune Men, her latest, which has won, all of her books have won multiple prizes, but The Fortune Men was also shortlisted for the really prestigious Booker Prize in 2021. And she's written a lot of short stories and essays and other things, and is now, as we hear, working on her 4th novel, which maybe she'll talk about a little bit. Her work explores questions of justice, migration, war, family and memory, and many other themes. And she has this uncanny ability to inhabit her Somali characters, whether they're her own fictionalized version of her father, or an old woman attempting to protect her family in the midst of war, or a man who's condemned to death for a crime he didn't commit. And so hopefully we'll try to get some insight into how all of that creative kind of personification happens. But first I want to start with some questions for Nuur, and to try to unpack some of the themes that you deal with in the writing that you do. So you, as I said, you focus a lot on the experiences of the Somali diaspora, and you recently wrote a short piece about why do you write about the diaspora? What's that all about? So maybe you could just explain to us kind of what motivates you and what's your interest in writing about the Somali diaspora in particular.
Sure. Thank you, Professor Laura. Thank you, friends and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, for coming tonight, and it's a pleasure to be with you. I thank my friend Ayan for the invitation, and obviously I also acknowledge my dear sister Nadifa, whom I admire quite a lot. I've read book, actually I got her book in there. I got a signature.
This is his book.
She's going to read from his book.
As a book. So thank you, and thank you for the host, the SOAS and Professor Laura Hammond, who's moderating the session tonight. Just to answer your questions, I mean, that short essay, I was trying to argue the importance of having a Somali heritage scholars, emerging or established scholars, researchers, or even Somali students to write their own diasporic experiences, so that they can build a body of knowledge where the next generation can access to. And I referred in the essay a discussion between me and my then supervisor, who was an Englishman, and I told him that I wanted to become a Vygotsky scholar. I didn't want to write anything else. I was interested in that Russian psychologist. And he was just surprised, and he said, look, why are you looking into a long dead psychologist, a Russian psychologist, when you can write your own community in London? So and then that's how I changed my mind. And I think, just to come to the questions why I'm interested in, and there was actually 3 points which often inspires me to write about the Somali diaspora. One is, there was a theory that I put forward in the past, which postulates in the year 2060 we might have more Somali diaspora in the diaspora, Somalis in the diaspora, than Somalis in the back. So that's mere 43 years. It's a theory, actually. This is what I just want to start the discussion. The second one is actually Somali intelligentsia in the diaspora don't often write about their experiences about Somali diaspora. Other people write them, but not necessarily. They're not interested in writing the diaspora, about the diaspora. And the last one is, Somali diaspora is and has been a lifeline for millions of Somalis back home. So therefore we are very important people, and therefore one has to write about us. Now, the question of what interests me in writing is looking at families, parents, raising the children in a country that sees them others, seeing them fathers who carry the weights of putting food on the table, not only for the children in the diaspora, but also back home through remittance commitments. And also kids who are born here, diaspora-born children, who ask questions: where is home? What is home? Is home where your parents were born? Is it home where you were born or grow up, like UK or the US? Those are the fundamental questions, and I think this are the things which really entices me to write the experience of Somali diaspora.
And how do you think you're writing about a community, but you're also part of that community, right? So how does your own experience of living in the diaspora and growing up within that community influence the way you work? That's one question. And the other side of it is, has your research changed the way you think about that experience?
Yes, absolutely. I am a member of the Somali diaspora. In fact, I am a researcher, but also I'm an object of research. So I could be both ways. So I'm the person that I'm talking about, and I'm the one who's engaging the research. So in that sense, of course, my experiences actually influences my writing. Also, my research influenced the way I look into the diaspora, because now I understand through my research the interplay between various factors. For example, if you look at education and employment, it's an issue that I never understood before. So I know now, if you have the more education you have, the more employability, employable you will be, an opportunity there. Perhaps the interplay between language proficiency and integration. So if you are a proficient in a language where you are hosted, or the nation who hosts you, then you become more integral to the society. So there's quite a lot of influence in terms of my own research. And before I've engaged and started doing research, I didn't know all these things. So yes, it's absolutely influential.
Yeah. So one of the things you write about in your work is in both the work that focuses on the UK, as well now this book you've got looking at the experiences of young Somali men in the US, in Minneapolis in particular. Yeah. You've talked about the importance of Somali families and of the importance of kind of support networks within the families to provide support for young people. So how do you think that, I guess the question is, can you say something about why you think that's so important and what happens when that's not there? Then also another question is, when that kind of support is not there within a family, that can be one set of problems, but isn't there also another set of problems around the kind of what some academics would call the structural factors of lacking access to education or employment or housing, or the kind of structural discrimination and unfortunately racism that exists in this society that also plays against people. So kind of putting those things together, the family side as well as the broader community side, how do you see things?
Well, the way I see it is true. A very, very good question, actually, is we, the diaspora, in the diaspora, it could be UK or in the US, we have a lot of structural issues or societal systematic issues that we have to overcome. I think when you look at, I will be reading some passage about housing, about racism, about kids being expelled, students where parents are unable to challenge those schools. So those impact us, but my interest is really to be able to unpack those factors in a way that the ordinary people can understand. So therefore, when I put forward stories of Salah, for instance, who his parents were unable to rent out in a neighborhood where it's desirable neighborhood, and they ended up in Cedar, where a place where the crime is a commonplace, where schools are falling apart. And then that impacts on him, so much so that he goes into prison, and he claims about that. So I write those things, but also there are people who overcome those issues and now found a way in which they can just find an opportunity to buy houses outside those undesirable neighborhoods. I mean, the story in general is here's the problem we face, whether that is internal inside the family, where perhaps maybe I talked about absent fathers who are not really interested in staying here, where the myth of return is still alive and kicking, or parents who might not necessarily understand what's going on outside their homes. Even though those problems exist, I will still argue that there are ways in which you can overcome those problems. And I think, in fact, there was an article I've written about 5 steps of being successful in the diaspora, where education, integrating with society, financial security, and having proficiency of the language that the country you live. So all those things, there's an interplay between them, but I still believe that there's a way in which you can overcome. I don't know whether that answers the question.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. We can maybe come back to that and some of the other questions. And the last question I wanted to ask you is around the role of diaspora. So I do research on diaspora as well, and both in the diaspora, but as well in Somali areas, right? Talking to people about how they see the diaspora. And so one of the things you very often hear when you go back, I mean, I did a lecture in the University of Hargeisa, for instance, and I asked the question, what are some of the positives and negatives of diaspora engagement in society here? And I could have just sat down and that would have been the end of the lecture, because they had such interesting things to say and very animated about, there's this positive aspect and there's this negative aspect, and goes on and on. But in some ways, there seemed to be a kind of appreciation in some ways of, yes, the lifeline that you talked about, and in others a feeling of like, but what we're dealing with here politically, socially, they don't quite get it, right? They're comfortably in London or in Helsinki or Minneapolis or whatever they are, and they don't really understand what we're going through. So how does that play out in the work that you're doing?
This plays quite a crucial, really, point. I think that criticism is a fair criticism. I think one thing is very, very clear. The Somali diaspora has been and is still a lifeline. I haven't got the latest figures in terms of remittance, but I know it's in billions. We do that. There are Somali diasporic folks who go to Somalia, of course, mess up with politics. There's a lot of criticism in terms of our role as a diaspora in the political arena. Of course, for the last 15 years, the dominant figures in Somali politics were diaspora-based individuals. So the reputation is not that good if you ask some local players. But generally, I think the issue of if we were only contributing remittance and then stopping there, perhaps maybe still the criticism would have been there. The criticism would have been probably they are not involving in terms of other sectors like education, other investment, etc., etc. But I think the problem we have in terms of the Somali diaspora, the concept itself, although I talk about diaspora, we don't fit in that umbrella. And you know very well because you've done quite a lot of work on that. Diaspora means people who've been exiled from their country and then perhaps maybe one way exiled.
Yeah.
Whereas I think Somalis will fit with the concept of transnationalism. So it's transnational. If anyone interested, there's a book by scholars Rene Bobok and Thomas Fist explaining beautifully the concept of the difference between the conceptual understanding of diaspora and the transnational. I think we fit well with transnational because transnational individuals are people who are fully engaged in the country. Politics, economic, social, we're fully engaged. In fact, some of my research, parents I spoke to talk about their luggage unpacked yet. Yeah. They still think
after
they
years,
can go back
right?
after years of being here. So we're transnational rather than really diasporic. Other communities stay here for good. I mean, if you look at some other African communities, some decided actually to stay here forever. But we are very transnational. We're still connected. We still talk about, in fact, I quote a famous quote by Nuruddin Farah, which says, if it rains in Mogadishu, the umbrellas go up in Minneapolis. In other words, if anything happens in Somalia, we feel here very quickly. Obviously, social media is now amplifying that. But so I think that's conceptual problems is also what creates it. Our role is not only to send money, our role also is to be connected. I have to call my mom, who's in Ethiopia, 5 times a week. I have to know exactly what she's eating or where she's staying, etc. So economically connected, financially connected, also spiritually connected, because we want them to be successful. Yeah. Criticism, yes, acceptable, but I think it's more nuance rather than what people see as a black and white. It's not a binary thing.
Exactly. I think that's really true. I've used the term part-time diaspora sometimes. Those people are always coming and going. And just on the way in, people would, I just arrived from Hargeisa, I just arrived from, many of you are what we might call part-time diaspora.
Well, yeah, we all want.
So, great. You said you wanted to share some of your reading with us. We'd love to hear it. Yeah? Can you hear all right? Sure. Is it all right if he can speak from here? Yeah? Great.
So, I don't know whether you brought the book copy yet, but what I want to do is I want to read a couple of passages. One is what I called absent fathers. So fathers would be very annoyed tonight if there's fathers here. But I have to read this, I think. So, as I quote earlier on, when Nuruddin talks about when it rains in Mogadishu, the umbrellas go up in Minneapolis, in other words, or Minnesota. In other words, we are very, very connected back home. Somalis are, regardless of their social position, by nature highly political. The clan system and the social structure of Somali culture provide a fertile ground for the politics of division to flourish. So my research reveals that the majority of Somali fathers in the state of Minnesota or anywhere in the diaspora invest significant amount of time and energy in the clan-based politics of Somalia, resulting in unsupervised homes and boys without role models. There are 2 types of absent fathers, which I discovered in my research. Those I call physical absence, the father who's not in there, they are away, they're engaged in politics and they're whatever business, and what I called now psychological absent. And I think my wife was asking me and said, look, you're describing yourself really when you talk about psychological absent. So I'm present, but I'm psychologically absent. Right. So the physical absent is the fathers who physically not at home, rarely at home, since they are traveling to Somalia or other places for business or politics. So I will illustrate this, a story of Ahmed, so a pseudonym. Ahmed is not a real name. So Ahmed is a father of 3 children, 1 daughter aged 7 and 2 sons aged 10 and 19 years old. He travels extensively between Minneapolis, Nairobi and Mogadishu for a mixture of business and politics. His wife is a full-time mother and looks after the children in his absence. The 19-year-old son, although attending a school and doing relatively well, has had problems with the police of alleged shoplifting and other minor crimes. The mother is unable to control her son. He never listens to her, and according to her, comes home late because he's out with his friends. Ahmed, when he's back from his trips, never seriously engaged with his son. He never sits with him to discuss the issues that his son is facing. On numerous occasions, the two parents have conflicted over the father's lack of involvement in his children, upbringing, leading to serious relationship problems. The issue here is not that the son is rebellious, it is that because the son has never had input from his father. He has no or little benefits from the role model from his dad. So Ahmed is not necessarily a bad, an uncaring father, according to his wife. He provides for them financially. He takes care of them, the family. But the problem is he has what I called a confused priority. In other words, he thinks his priority lies in Somalia. And therefore, this is what we're talking about, transitional. So he's engaged fully in Somalia. He goes back, but he forgets that this is where the roots are. Rather than his own, the majority of fathers who absent. So this is our physical absent. This is also very quickly a psychological absent. Those who are psychologically absent, where I think I fit. So Jama is a father of 6 children, 4 sons and 2 daughters. He's highly educated and holds a well-paying job. His wife is also educated to degree level, and works part-time in educational setting. Growing up, all seemed well with the boys in their preteen age. They had no problems with their schoolwork, went to after-school classes and attended Quranic lessons at the local mosque on their mother's initiative. However, trouble started when the boys were in their late teens. For one in particular, he started to drift away from school, get into trouble with the police, and become involved in gang-related fights in the area. While this was happening, Jama was at home, but was not aware of what was going on in his son's life. He was psychologically detached from them. According to his wife, Jama goes to work in the morning, Monday to Friday, and comes home in late afternoon or sometimes in the evening. At the weekend, he occasionally drops them at the mosque, but often goes to meet with his friends in what she calls a Somali coffees, malls. One day in the early hours of the morning, Jama's house was raided by the anti-drug police officers looking for Jama's eldest son for drug-related crimes. Jama's psychological detachment is harmful, as obviously a physical detachment. So this is really one thing. One more quickly, if you allow me, just very quickly. I want to read also on the other side of the coin what I called overprotecting moms. So moms who are protecting their boys more than their daughters. So here's the story of a Samatar and his mom. So his father said, everything I teach my son is then untaught by his overprotecting mother. It is kushub kashub. In other words, I fill in, she empties it. So he says, and the headline is actually, is he special needs? So the kid is not special needs, but this is what the story is about. So Jamila is a mother of 3, 2 daughters aged 15 and 12, and the son aged 18 years old. According to Jamila, her daughters are very independent and rarely and rely less on her. This is according to the mom. The same cannot be said, though, of her son. What makes her 15-year-old daughter and her not yet a teenage girl of 12 so independent, while her 18-year-old son is not? This is a question. Jamila's son, Samatar, believes the problem is not him, but his ever-helping mom is the problem. His mother's his independence, and here's the story of Jamila and her son. So Samatar, like Somali boys, most of Somali boys did not have a good experience at school. Bright, articulate, he would get into trouble with teachers. He was labeled as a troublemaker. Both, I think I have to put the question mark, actually troublemaker, both inside and outside the class, although he denies forcefully that this was the case. According to Samatar, he talked a lot in the lesson because he had so much to say, but the teachers wanted to hear none of that. As a result, his grades and exam results suffered, although not irreparably. In his senior year, he achieved respectable grades and was expected to go to college, in other words, university, but did not do so. While he was growing up, his father, whom he refers as the laid-back daddy, his father is just laid back, doesn't involve too much, watched him from afar, responding him only when he needed something. However, his mother was anything but a layback. She would wash and cook for him and buy clothes and shoes without his knowledge. According to Samata, his mother's overparenting behavior continued throughout his late teens to the extent that it affected his confidence in dealing with the adult world. It also affected his relationship with his mother. He resents the fact that his younger sisters enjoy more autonomous than he does. If he goes out with his friends, his helicopter, he calls it helicopter, mother will not stop calling him to ask where he is and what he needs to eat when he gets back home. And then this is where a story comes. Does he have special needs? This is a story. I'll just finish this one. So not sure what subject to study at college or what career he wanted to choose. Samata decided to attend a career fair. His mother, Jamila, without being asked, insisted that she wanted to come along to help him and to make him a good choice. At an interview with one of her career advisors, Samata's mother assumed the lead in the discussion. Despite her limited English language skills, surprised by her domination, the career advisor asked Jamila, is there special needs? Is your child a special needs? To which she replied, no. Confused, the advisor turned to the Samata and said, okay, so why are you not asking questions then? Is it not you who want to go to college? Annoyed by that, Samata replied, sir, this is what my mom does all the time. It's not me, it's her fault, in other words. In the meantime, in the name of supporting me, so she treats me like I am. So the story goes on, but that shows exactly how from absent fathers, non-involving fathers psychologically and physically, but also on the other side of the spectrum, overparenting mom and how that affects on the children as well.
I'm sure they could have an interesting discussion around whether the mom is overbearing because the dad is laid back. But anyway, we can have that from the discussion. Thank you. Great. So if you've got questions for Nuur, just hold on to them because we're going to move now to Nadifa and ask her some questions, and then we'll have broaden it out. So Nadifa, you have these amazing 3 novels, and I remember once when we were in Somaliland together, you said, I have 3 novels in me and that's it. So I'm really delighted that you're working on a 4th, that you're not done. But so far, as I mentioned in the introduction, what I'm always struck by with reading your novels is the really strong Somali characters you have there, who are, they're not like you. I mean, they are kind of like you. Your father, as a fictionalized boy, is kind of like you, but not really. Mahmoud Matan is not really like you. I mean, but yet you kind of get inside them, and you make us feel that we're inside them as we're reading them, and I wanted to kind of ask you a little bit about how you develop a character. How do you get inside that kind of a character, particularly because, I think in most of these cases they're historical characters, right? So there's a bit of research that goes into that process of trying to understand the landscape, the events, and then the people. Can you tell us something about what that creative process is like?
Thanks, Laura. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. Did I really say there was only 3 books in me?
I should have, you did. I'm challenging you because I'm hoping that there's many
There's
more.
definitely 4, I think, but maybe not much more after that. So I think it's quite a taxing process of bringing worlds to life, people that you are invested in. So, of course, I was invested in my father. In the Orchard of Lost Souls, there's a seed of the story which came from my grandmother's experience of the Civil War. And then, of course, The Fortune Men centers on Mahmoud Matan, a real Somali young man who was executed by the state in 1952 in Cardiff. And my father knew him, and there was all of these parallels. I felt like I was only 1 degree away from him. So the research and the historical background, I think, is a big part of it. And just listening to Nuur, I think all of these small case studies are a big part of it. your lived experience. We all can think of the overcompensating mother, the absent fathers. That's all part of the tapestry of our lives. But I think for it to become a novel, it has to probably sit with me for a long time. So the book I'm working on now was first in my mind in 2015. So it's taken that much time to really get to grips with what am I trying to say, who are these characters, what's going on, what's the texture of it. And I think it's exciting to always go somewhere that you don't know. I tend to not write about a life similar to mine because it's a little bit less interesting. And there's something at the moment I'm trying to recreate Mogadishu before the war and at the beginning of the war. So there's that kind of challenge that you set yourself to bring something up from nothing.
And what comes first? Is it the story and the plot, or the characters themselves that you build a plot around?
It varies. It varies. So with my first novel, my father was right there, so he was the source. He was right there, and he kind of felt that his own life stopped being so interesting after he came to Britain as a merchant sailor, and his life just became quite routine after that. So that gave it a natural end. Even though I don't think his life was that ordinary afterwards. And with this novel at the moment that's in my mind, there isn't so much a plot. There's a kind of vague plot, but the characters are the ones who are exciting me now, and their viewpoint, how it differs from what I think I know about the Civil War and of Mogadishu, so that you can learn a lot through the eyes of those characters.
And where does your fascination with history come from? And
my dad was interested in it as well. I think it's probably partly inherited. I think Somalia in particular, the whole region, Somaliland, has had a very tumultuous history in the last 150 years or so. So there's a lot to kind of wrestle with. And I think the very first question that came to me without really understanding it was, why am I here? I think Black Mamba Boy was trying to answer the question, why am I here living this life in Britain? And to know that, I had to go back through my father's history. So I think with each book, there's probably a question in the air that I'm trying to answer, and history is part of the answer.
And I mean, both, I would say probably Black Mamba Boy and Orchard of Lost Souls, as you say, directly related to your family. And The Fortune Man, although your father knew Mohamed Matan, it's more removed from your own personal story, right? But so I wanted to say, to just take a moment to think a little bit about The Fortune Man, and the fact that when it came out a couple of years ago was quite a kind of pivotal moment in terms of British social politics and as well dynamics in the US, and you've done book tours and readings in the US as well. And so in a sense, it's a piece of historical fiction, but it has very much a kind of current commentary on where societies are now. Could you say something about that? Yes, for sure.
And it's funny because I think from an early age, I was interested in politics, in social inequality, in stories of small people who are impacted or even destroyed by the state or by forces greater than themselves. And I think most young people don't really want to, in my experience and amongst the people I was around, they didn't really want to think about it too much because it was depressing. So you always sound like a Debbie Downer wanting to bring up upsetting social problems, but they never really disappear. So I could write a novel set in 1952 and not much has changed till 2022, whatever it was, 2021. So everything that happened of George Floyd and the protests and this almost sudden recognition of things that had been known about for so long. We'd known about the police, both in the US and in the UK. We'd known about structural inequalities. And it was almost as if people had woken up from a dream. So for me, it was strange working in that environment and producing a novel that, we don't have capital punishment in this country, thankfully. But if we did, the same institutional racism would bear out that impacted Mahmoud Matan's life. So I think things move very slowly. So things that seem like historical problems are actually often contemporary problems at the same time. And by banging on, and I think as well, people can sometimes understand more sharply through a historic lens, as we're seeing right now in global events, when everything is happening right in front of you, there's lots of mist, there's lots of fake news, of propaganda, of mistakes, just honest mistakes about facts. And history allows you to strip some of that away and have a more clinical look at how things happened.
Sure. And the process of writing is quite a solitary one, right? By definition, both of you. And you're in your room, you're writing your story, and then suddenly it gets published, and in your case, it's come out to quite wide acclaim, right? To receiving, when you won the Somerset Maugham Award, you were named the Granta Best of Young British Novelists 10 years ago, and then the Booker Success as well. How does that feel when there's something that's so personal to you is kind of feted in that way?
It's it's great. You know, you never want it to not happen. But I think now that I'm older and I can see younger writers coming through the same process, I think people have to warn you about the impact. And I think for me, I didn't have a particular ambition to become a writer. I hadn't gone through the process of doing an MA or MFA in creative writing. It was a really new world to me. And having that exposure, that scrutiny of a story that had felt very private up until then, I can see it's a difficult process to navigate. And after writing Black Mamba Boy, I think I could have easily stopped then and not written again, but I had a contract to fulfill, so I ended up writing another novel and then another novel, and then it becomes a more supple process. But I'm watching younger writers going through the same struggles, especially I think if they're from quite fragile, marginalized backgrounds or have mental health issues. I think that there is a lack of care sometimes offered to writers to navigate that, because I think even you're meant to always be grateful for success, but success needs just as much navigation as failure, I think.
And you've had success both here in the UK as well as in the US, and well, but I mean,
I don't want to overstate that.
Yeah, but all right. Let's say you were a distinguished lecturer at New York University, right, last year, and spent some time teaching there and speaking with American audiences. How do you think the response to your work is? Is it different there than it is here?
Yes, I think Muslim stories are very new to them. Black British stories and history is something that they don't know much about. I think they have this because of the awful fact that some American states still have the death penalty, and it's 80% plus 90% in some places black men who are executed in those places or on death row. So that was easily identifiable for them as readers. But I think America being so vast and having such a big African-American literary history as well, I think it can be difficult to shift that lens to somewhere new. And also, I think the American media is not great at showing clearly what places like Somalia are like. They are places of danger, of suffering, of failure. It's like the antithesis of what the US is meant to signify. So you're also trying to skip over that boundary as well.
Yeah, sure. You said that the work you're working on now is not, the plot isn't as well developed, but can you give us a sneak preview of what we're in store?
It's still very, very early.
Okay. Here, you've got it here. This is the first.
Let's just say that it's transnational.
Okay.
And it's, in a way, I'm looking back at the things I don't know about that civil war. I've thought about it when it comes to Hargeisa and what happened with my family, but there's a wider story about the Somali civil war, which, even though I'm interested in history, I don't know that much about. So I'm now starting to fill in those gaps, but not from a political kind of omniscient view. It's from the perspective of a small group of people who are intelligent, worldly, interconnected with stories and histories around the world, but are now confronting the tragedy of what happened in Somalia in real time, in the moment.
So So a bit of history and a bit of contemporary.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's contemporary in London and then historical in Somali.
Okay. So a bit of diaspora, transnational.
Yes.
Yeah. Good, great. Did you want to read something for us?
Sure.
Great.
The plump, fat marbled kosher mince begins to sizzle and brown in the pan, and Mahmoud shakes a teaspoon of chili powder into the oil. He had bought kosher all the time in East London because he had a good butcher only a few doors down, and kosher is as good as halal, religiously speaking, but now, for some reason, it also tastes better to him. Holding the mysterious Hindi-labelled spices up to his nose, he picks out cumin, turmeric, and ginger. Good enough, and spills a teaspoon of it over the lamb. He'll eat some mince with a side of tinned sweet corn for lunch, and then mix the remainder of the last of the rice in the evening. This is as much good eating as he's capable of now. Even though he had learnt how to steam, stew, and roast while a ship's pantry boy, and to bake from the little kitchen job he'd had in the Somali boarding house he'd roomed in last year. Mahmoud still can't accept that he is just another uncared-for man, eating from a plate on his lap in the solitude of a cold rented room. He'd always helped Laura in the kitchen. What other husband would have? He'd had to, because she had no sense of what good food tasted like. He'd managed to get her to use herbs and spices, but still her carrots would be undercooked, her potatoes mushy, her meat dry and gasping. Now meals are just another thing he has to do by himself, for himself. Everything with just his own damned hand. Laura has fixed him in this longitude and latitude. He's only living in this house with black men he has no common language, culture, or religion with, so that he can stake her out and keep things rolling between them until she comes to her senses. He watches the company she keeps and crosses the road to see his sons every few days. In many ways, it's a come-up from that derelict Somali boarding house he was told to leave after the mosque business. He has a room to himself with a lock on it, rather than that attic room sprawling with camp beds. He doesn't have to put up with the all-night coughing or gossip or damp laundry dripping from the lines suspended across the ceiling. All of the other seamen were lazy buggers, rolling around in bed, waiting for someone else to get the stove hot in the mornings. Mahmoud remembers the yellowed list of regulations pinned up above his head that Warsame had read to him before telling him to pack his bags. 1. The seaman's lodging house keeper shall not sell or be engaged in the sale of intoxicating liquor, or be engaged or interested in the business of a clothier, outfitter, or a slop dealer. 2. The medical officer of health, officers of the Board of Trade, and police have right of access and inspection to his premises at any time. 3. He must provide at least 30 cubic feet of airspace for each person in his dormitories and not accommodate at any time a larger number of lodgers than has been authorised by the council. 4. He must follow out certain provisions regarding sanitation, water closets and washing facilities and general hygiene. He must affix in a prominent place a copy of the city's bylaws in this respect, together with his scale of charges, and not make a higher charge than is provided by the scale. 5. He must not admit or fail to exclude from his premises any thief, reputed thief, prostitute or reputed prostitute, or any other person of immoral or improper character. Mahmoud had laughed when Warsame had got to that last rule. So he was no better than a prostitute? A cheap. He packed his trunk and vacated his 30 cubic feet of air, moving into Doc's place that very same afternoon.
I'm going to hand over to the audience for questions, but I have one question for both of you, which is to say a little bit, if you could say something about your own motivation. Why do you write? And what kind of advice would you have for someone who wants to write? Be a writer or just write for themselves or whatever it is. What kind of advice would you give them?
I think I write with anger. I write for revenge.
Okay.
And it's a nice, sharp, cold revenge that you can maintain over a long period of time. So I think having actually an emotion like that or a desire like that is a great motivation to write. I think a lot of people want to write, and what stops them or what ends up becoming inhibiting is that that cold rage or love or grief or whatever it might be, that emotional thing that's underpinning it all. Because it could take 5 years, it could take 20 years, but there's something that has to be consistently driving you all the way through. So I think you need a story that taps into whatever that deep emotion is.
You don't strike me as that vengeful of a person.
I hide it well.
For me, it's slightly different, actually. I write because I need to know myself.
Okay.
I always write about my inner core emotions. Yes, it's not vengeful emotions, but it's just general emotions. I also write because I tend to try and also to mimic what the future holds for me. For instance, when I'm writing my book on this book and my other essays and stuff is about what will future looks like perhaps in 20 years' time from the diaspora point of view. What my children's children will be doing this time, how would their culture, religion, connection with Somalia be felt? So it's about futuristic, looking into the future, writing about my own core emotional, internal, unexplored feelings. So writing gives me that kind of outlet where I can express myself. I haven't obviously reached a stage yet, but
You need more anger.
maybe I need more anger. But that's how I write, and I think going back to what Nadifa was saying about when people are emerging writers, and especially from marginalized background, the fear is you write something and then you're not sure whether your writing is good enough for others, the audience. So it's a fear that not only, yes, I know what I'm feeling and I can put my own feeling in there, but I don't know whether the audience will be at ease of my feeling, whether they will approve that. And that comes on America when you said they were just...
approve or understand?
Understand, perhaps maybe even take it seriously, whether this is a serious work of writing. Right. So it's always a fear, and I think every writer goes through that, but especially if you're coming from a marginalized background, you have that kind of feeling where, oh, I'm putting this forward, people can read it, but what will be the feedback? What will be the audience? Or will there be someone who's nasty and he will write about, or she will write about these things in terms of reviews and stuff? But yeah, I mean, that's how I write.
So I have some of my students say, I'm not sure if people will take me seriously or if it will be good, so I'm not writing yet. I'm just sitting. And I say to them, writing is like a muscle. You have to kind of keep exercising that muscle. Even if you don't think it's good today, if you do it every day for a month, 6 months, it gets better, doesn't it? I think it
definitely. Does. And I think one mistake maybe people make is to show things too early when they're still developing their confidence. So that when you're in a little bubble, you lose some of that inhibition. But I think there is an element where there are certain things you have to get right to make it understandable. You don't want to confuse people in terms of what you mean. You don't want it to read in a way that's not intended or doesn't fit the subject matter, whether that's fiction or non-fiction. I think there are rules to a degree, but then especially with creative writing, there's lots of openness and your own creativity comes into play where there's not necessarily a right or wrong, and it should not matter whether the audience approves of what you're writing. I think being more challenging, being more confrontational in literature is actually a really good thing.
But it's true that both of you are writing, in a sense, you're writing for wide communities, but you're also writing to your community. Some of whom are here, many of whom are here. And that's also, it puts you in a place of vulnerability because you're going to be judged by the community.
And there's also, I think, especially felt it at the beginning of my career where, because Somalis have either very little attention or very negative attention, that you're meant to promote a positive impression and image of the community and its history and its value. And of course, you don't want to denigrate people who are already being denigrated. But then if you do have a Somali audience, then I think what's also valuable is for you to be open and not sugarcoat things, not hide from things. And I think that happens a lot, and especially now that I'm conscious of writing about the Civil War, which is such a sensitive topic, it'll only have value if I'm honest and brutally honest with that, and allow for all of the different perspectives and conflicts that are part of that, but to at least say something that people can emotionally engage with.
No, I mean, you're right. I mean, I remember when I launched this book in Minnesota, there was a lot of friends sending me emails saying, no, you've been very, very hard on fathers. Well, how dare you write these things, you know? We're not absent. I said, you're absent. That's what you do. You're right. So you've got to be brutally honest with the fact. But again, we have a tendency, Somalis, where we come back. Those fathers who were accusing me of being harsh on them actually came and bought my books. So it's you've got to actually, ride.
Put it out there.
Yeah, exactly. You have to ride the storm for a while, and then think everything will subside in a minute. But you've got to be honest with your own writing. It's true.
Great.
So the issue of transnationality is true. I mean, when you go back to Somalia, whether you go back to engage in politics or investment or even provide education, there's always a question mark where people will ask and say, okay, you came here to take our jobs, etc., etc. So there's a lot of jealousies, resentment between the locals and the diaspora. In fact, there are questions about whoever is either bald or shaved and speaks English is from diaspora. Because the majority of the diaspora, men often happens to be bald. I don't know why. I'm one of them actually. I'm not bald yet, but maybe yet. Yeah. So there is there, and the transnationalities things you've mentioned is I talked about in the book Dhaqan Elis, for instance. A young person like you, if they go there, that you will be assumed as a Dhaqan Elis person. Yeah. I can't see you. Maybe you look young anyway. But so Dhaqan Elis means you know Dhaqan Elis, yeah. So they think that you've been brought back because somehow you need to be corrected. There's some wrong with you. So there's a host of things going on, and I hope this resentment needs to be really reconceptualized, and people need to understand our roles as a diaspora and the locals' roles as well. So therefore, the tension exists, but I don't know the answer to that. Yeah. Shall I continue? Yeah. So the question of Mahdi, my friend Ainanshe talks about mothers not having enough engagement outside. So therefore, maybe that may be the reason why they are overprotecting the boys. I don't know whether that is really. I can agree with that the sort of thesis, because girls also, daughters also, if that was the case, why are they concentrating on the boys only? So perhaps maybe they could have concentrated on the girls as well. Yes, they might not necessarily have the opportunity to an outlet where they can volunteer or do this and that, but they already have enough on their plates anyway. There's 6 kids, 7 kids. The average family household is about what, 6 plus? Really? Yeah. According to my research, it's 6 plus. So they have enough anyway, and they don't need outside engagement. I think this is to do with a story I've heard from an old man in Minneapolis, and he said, look, the reason why moms are now obsessed is because men are absent from home. And now we've created a woman mothers who have 2 roles now. The role of father and the role of mother. So therefore they're overcompensating this issue. So the father's not there, so therefore they have to concentrate. And also, I talk about in the book the issue of a professor who wrote a letter to his son, how black men struggle in the streets. I talk about a Somali girl and a Somali boy. There's a chapter where if Nadifa goes into the high street now, and I go into the high street, well, I mean, UK is not that problematic, but in the US, let's say, Nadifa might not necessarily have a problem in terms of the police. It's quite unlikely that Islamophobia, maybe yes, she's been seeing that, but I will be attracted. As soon as I'm in the street, I'm always kind of a threat to the people. So therefore, I'm always a target. I'm always looked at. Anyone who holds the bags will look at me and they say, "Is this guy is going to rob me or something? Or what's going on?" So there's always a fear, and therefore that visceral feeling, fear. Mothers are now expressing that, and there's a lot of death in the States. There's a lot of kids, Somali kids, who lost their lives. Unfortunately, Somali on Somali. And therefore there's a visceral fears that, oh, I need to protect my son. Daughters are fine; they can look after themselves. So that really might be an issue.
But it's also a very long established favoritism as well, a cultural favoritism, whether they were back in Somalia, Somaliland, or in the diaspora. And I think that's made even worse in a way by the husband's absence, because he becomes the man of the family, the one that gets everything, who's told that he's going to save the mother, save the family in some way, which is a lot of responsibility on a young person. But I think we can't underestimate the really ingrained attitudes that are part of it.
Sure, I agree. And the issue of stigma, I think there's a passage on the mental health. Somalis conceptualize mental health and mental health issues. We only call a person is a mad if he's naked and running in the street. Yeah. So if you're naked and you're running in the street and you're just throwing stones to people and you're fighting, then you call this person's got mental issues. But as long as you're dressed well, as long as you can speak well, we're not considered that. I think things are changing. But back Somalia, there was a time when if you say actually I have some mental issues, I'm depressed or anxiety, and I need a doctor, people will look at you and say, look, this guy is not man. You've got to man up. And I think there's a lot of cultures in Scotland, for instance. There is a culture in Scottish people where they don't believe mental health issues. They believe there's something in there. So yes, we have that, and so it's not only unique to Somalis, but we are learning now because there's a lot of addictions. I mean, there was a opioid rise of opioid addictions in the States. I mean, Ainansha knows that he volunteers quite a few student centers. So there is a problem, but there's difficult to reconceptualize getting that culture. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, it's something I've been thinking about a lot because of thinking about the war and the consequences. And I remember when I was very young. And you had the first wave of refugees arriving, and a lot of them were isolated, living very hand-to-mouth on maybe £30 a week from the state, and then having to send some of that back to their family in a refugee camp. So a very scary and difficult place for them to be. And there were clearly people who were having mental health issues. And as long as I think you could sort of straddle normality and whatever behavioural issues were also showing you were okay. I think this desire to protect, it's about how you're perceived and you're losing face as well. So I think as long as you could keep it together, whatever trauma, whatever turmoil was going on under the surface was left alone by your neighbours and your family and even by yourself. And it's only when it becomes unmanageable and someone is in crisis that it's actually then attended to, but not necessarily in a positive way. So I don't think we could have the kind of experiences that we've had as a community for the last 30 plus years and not have a very high level of mental health issues. So the understanding of it has to completely change.
Yeah.
It can't be, oh, you're mad and you're sane. There's like a long continuum and people are falling up and down that line all the time.
And the traumas are not only surely there are war-related traumas. There are traumas associated with what happened before people left Somalia. But at the same time, there are also traumas here. Right?
Yeah.
There are the traumas, being a mother and watching all of the different hazards that your child might fall into.
Scary.
Whether it's the police or gangs or just being in the wrong place at the wrong time is terrifying. Right?
It
that
is.
also creates its own trauma.
And I think it depends on who you are, but for many immigrants, there's a humiliation involved in immigrating, in losing whatever social capital you have. You don't understand the language that you're in now. You don't look the same. You don't even smell the same. All of these things which constantly mark you out as different and maybe inferior as well. I think that knock to someone's self-esteem and sense of identity is something that has to be tackled.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
It's not. I don't think we've approached it really as a community.
It's really important. It's good that
So the question, the question, I
the
think,
last
there's
question
talk-
around
yeah,
the future,
I think there was one
right?
question. Yeah, there was
Yeah.
one Somali politics and older men going into Somali politics, and there was one in the father's this concept of father absent, and then whether that will have an impact, negative impact on the next generations. So the first older men, it's true. I mean, I wrote an article about what I call the empty suit and Samsonite. I think, I don't know whether you've seen that on my Medium, where I was very critical about Somali men who more or less failed in the diaspora, who goes back again to make life out there. And if you look at the parliament, I was very, very critical, and I've got a lot of sticks from that essay. They go there and then they failed. They've got the children here. They haven't even gone to university or education, didn't have any education or work. And then all of a sudden they are MPs. They are ministers. They're making decisions on millions of people's life and daily lives. So older men is a problem, really. And it's not about age, but it's about whenever you hit 60 and you're in the diaspora, you realize you have no education, kids have grown up, the missus might not be necessarily interested in you anymore, and then you have to find a place. And I think this is an outlet. So I sympathize with them, but it's not good for the nation, really. So there is a problem. And the other one generation.
There are also people who are educated who never were able to use that education
here
also.
and then go there.
Yeah.
And the idea of also this negative stigma. I mean, my sister talks about. She runs a good school, by the way. She's a very good teacher. I mean, good. She's in the senior management. She talks about whether this father absent thing actually will impact on the second generation. I think I would read, if you allow me 1 minute. Yeah. There's a one good story, by the way, which will, I think, make you happy with that. So this is about the opposite of the people who are absent. So here is a story of Elias. Elias might be your dad, maybe, or similar to your dad's thing. So Elias is a father of 4 boys and 1 daughter. He's a self-employed and works full-time. So Elias is fully involved, psychologically present, physiologically present. So he's a role model, good role model. He's self-employed and works full-time, while his wife works part-time in a day care center. When he's at home, Elias so when he's not at home, Elias is at home with his children when he's not work. He has deliberately chosen to involve himself fully with his children's education and social lives. He constantly calls and receives message from schools his children attend, ensures that they are up to date with their schoolwork, liaises with after school and community centers in the city to keep him updated with the current issues facing young people. Elias also takes his children to recreational sports. I think this is what we're missing. And I talked about this in thing. We never engage our children we're very good at providing food, providing shelter, buying stuff, but not emotional attachment. And I remember when I read this passage when I was in Seattle, Washington, an old man raised his hand and said, look, I'm 70 plus, and I've never heard my father says, I love you. So there's no emotional. And he said, don't get me wrong, my father was a brilliant guy. He provided us everything. But he said he was there in the house, he has his own room, and he was like a lion. Nobody goes near him. But we respected him. So Elias actually liaises with the school to keep updates the current issues, young people. Elias also takes his children to recreational sports, soccer, basketball, swimming. By investing so much time in his children's educational and social lives, Elias has become an important stakeholder in his children's everyday lives. According to Elias, the bond between him and his children is stronger because they do so much things together. The trust is unbreakable. They ask any question. I mean, when I was growing up, I couldn't ask a question about my personal question about my father. I couldn't do that. I could not ask about the relationship I was in or whatever. I couldn't do that. So there was a barrier. Not because my dad was terrible. My dad was good, but there was cultural differences. Yeah. The trust is unbreakable. Okay, so friends and personal mistakes. The kids comes to him and they tell him. They discuss between Elias and his children before they become an issue, giving Elias, as he puts it, the opportunity to nip them in the bud very quickly. So you have Ilyas as well, who was involved on the spectrum as well. But I think the issue of the next generation, because of the cultural differences and the next generation growing up here, and perhaps even the marriage they go into is different. Because remember that the immigrant might have had a marriage where arrangement were involved, where you might not necessarily have chosen your partner, but this one is different. I think yes, we talked about generational trauma. That generational trauma might continue, but I think we might have a break in terms of absent fathers, because I've seen young fathers, actually diaspora-born fathers, who are still involved in their children.
I think the genre that I would have liked for there to be lots of literature from Somali or from Somali writers is probably travel writing. I feel like Somalis have been such great travelers and there's not much literature to show for it. So that's, I think, a gap that would be an amazing one to fill. I'm intending to write a small travel book of my own and catch up a little bit on that gap. But 3 books that should be in every home.
Your 3 books?
My 3 books.
That's my answer, yeah. Absolutely. There you go. That's easy.
Very good.
I had 3 books, yeah.
And what sustains me, I think, is because it's not something that disappears. It's not as if there's one horrible case and that's resolved and then everything is fine. It's something that you start to, the older you get, you see how cyclical it is. There'll be another horrible killing by the police in the not too distant future. It just goes round and round and round like that. We haven't broken that cycle. So you're still busy learning and trying to unpick or maybe get justice for the last one, and then there's another one. So I think there is something self-sustaining about that rage and desire for resistance. But I think as I get older as well, I do see that there's also got to be an element of self-protection. And you can't keep immersing yourself in the worst of the world because it never ends. Everywhere you look, you can stop thinking about police brutality in the UK and or the US, and then you start thinking about it in Somalia or Somaliland, where it's just as awful, or there are equally bad human rights abuses. This is the way of the world. I think we do have a responsibility to engage and change as much of it as we can, but we also have to find joy and self-care in all of that, because when you are marginalised, there's a fragility that's involved in that. And I think you also have to find ways of strengthening yourself, making yourself feel as if you are able to have the long fight rather than a short battle.
Nuur, what about you?
Yeah, so the question...
No, you can't have Nadifa. She's got the 3.
So you got 3. So I'm going to have identity and the 2060, the theory I postulated, put forward. So identity, Fathom, identity about when writing, do you think about your the identity of people you write for, or how do you navigate the identity? I think mine is quite easy because I write for my own community. So therefore, I don't have any identity problems. I think everyone relates to the story. I talk about Ilyas, I talk about Ahmed, Farah, Smehan. The names are there. Of course, Nadifa does the same thing. But mine is a very vivid, clear. Then you have fathers, mothers. So therefore, I don't have any problems in that sense. So I think it's quite easy. The question of why I think in the next 40 plus years, 2060, we will have more diaspora-based Somalis than back home. I think if we go at the rate we're going now, I talked about household, the average household being 6 plus, and the rate that the birth rate in Somalia, I'm talking about Somalia, not Somaliland and Somalia. I'm talking about the Somali country, not necessarily the Somali Ethiopia or Kenya. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about actually Somalia. I think there's a possibility we might have a more diasporic Somalis based in the diaspora than in. It's a theory. I'm just putting forward. I just want to start a discussion, a dialogue, to bring attention to the diaspora, because we're all thinking about back home. Everything is about there, transnational, but we're forgetting our kids here, our roots here, and then the question of where is home? What's home? If I ask Nadifa now, where is home? Probably she will say UK. Is that true? No? Okay. Yeah. So for me, it's Somalia, clearly. It would be Somalia. But my
What about
son,
if neither are?
that would be problematic. It would even be more problems, you see. So the question is actually, is it where your parents were born or where you were born and work? So my children were born in the UK. They work here. They went to school. So for them is if you ask the question of home, unless I confuse them, they say UK. And then I'll get angry. I'll say, no, it's Somalia. And they say, no, it's not Somalia. That's where you were born, father. Yeah. That's you. That's your place. Exactly, that's my place. And therefore, there's those problems. So, and that's why I want to bring the dialogue back to the discussion. I think there's a lot of, and also in the US, there's a lot of problems in Somali youth, especially the boys. UK, we have the same problem. Australia, the same problem. Canada, the same problem. We have a lot of issues going on there. So therefore, we must have some kind of dialogue. In terms of the solution
But then you've excluded back home, which also has a lot of problems with young men joining militias, being involved in clan violence. So you're, in a way, it's a unified problem being enacted in different places, but the violence is the same.
It's true. Violence is still the same, but remember that if we take the Somali diaspora out of the equation, I think the Somalia cannot survive on its own. So therefore, my point is, yes, true, we have a problem there. There's a lot of issues there. In fact, there's also addiction problem in Mogadishu. I don't know whether you've read an article in the BBC that talks about girls actually being addicted to drugs in Mogadishu. So we talk about here problems, and I remember years back I took my daughter back to Ethiopia, and she was about 10, 15. She was wearing hijab at the time. And all my cousins, daughters who were actually the same age, were not wearing anything. So they're surprised and say, well, you came from UK, but you're still wearing the hijab we don't wear here. And they were based in Somalia. So we think actually everything is bad here in terms of the culture issues. But when you go back again, you will see differences. But I think the problem is we are now established community as a diaspora. And therefore, our scholars, researchers, writers needs to talk about us, our experiences, rather than allow someone else to talk about them. So that was really my general argument. In terms of giving an advice to solution for the physical, it's in the book. So if you read, it's in the book. Yeah, so just read there. But there is a solution for the absent fathers, and I can't actually dictate. I can't say I'm better because I myself I am psychologically absent. So I am one of them as well. I'm a researcher and an object of research as well. So
Why
therefore,
can't you change that? Why can't you change that?
I'm trying. I'm just trying. Still trying. Yeah. You can ask my wife actually, but I'm trying. Still, yeah. So it's not yet clear, but yeah. So, and the last one, which was actually the Russian, you've answered it, is why I was interested in Vygotsky. Vygotsky is actually presented for me. I mean, I was interested in Russian literature really. I mean, Dostoevsky. I've read almost all his books. I was always interested in the way the Russians write literature is quite unique. It's actually very close to Somalis as well. They talk about travel, crime, they talk about suffering, all those things is somehow, I kind of like it. So Dostoevsky maybe, I mean the three books we've already handled that, I don't know, they're three books if you want to have the shelves. But Vygotsky actually appealed to me because he was a psychologist, I was doing education, and therefore he offered me something like growing family, the interplay between education and family, background, and socio-economic issues, and therefore that's why I was attracted to him. Oh, so my point of view, okay. Crime and punishment? Yeah, because there's a lot of Somalis who get away with a lot of murders.
Tell me about it.
Yeah.
I don't know actually whether they can translate or not. I mean, we have a good translator here. I mean, where is he?
Boderi.
Boderi, yeah. Boderi, maybe that's your next project.
He's meant to be translating Black Mamba Boy.
Oh, is he?
Don't distract him.
Oh, okay.
When he finishes that, punishment.
Right. So for the question of my brother there, in terms of absent fathers being common in historically, it's true. I mean, that old man was telling me that his father was there. Nobody approached him. He provided everything remotely, but nobody was interacting. Yeah. However, remember that situation is different. We have then their extended families, aunties, uncles, grandma, grandpa, grandpa. So there you go there. That here it's not really. So it's different, and therefore you're on your own. You have to swim, or
sink.
You sink. So therefore, absent fathers, and therefore that, because of the situation in the diaspora, highlights more. Fathers are needed, so much so.
Do you think also, I mean, there's the community, so if your father is away when you're in Mogadishu from the community.
There's always uncles
There's the
who can
community
fill.
there, but also there are, as we talked about, there are these pressures in the diaspora from the structural factors, from the,
Correct.
all those kinds of challenges which are kind of going at you from all different angles, which are unfamiliar, and you lack a community to be able to cope with them. So it's a piling on
I'm
stresses.
trying to write about this now, actually, from the perspective of people in the early 90s, mid-90s, when they were thrown into the situation that neither the man or the woman was prepared for, a complete dislocation of everything that they were used to. And I think the men often, and this is, it's a big statement and one that has to be unpacked, and there's lots of caveats, but in some respects, I think the men chose themselves. So they went where they felt better. And if it was not in the home, they left the home. And then the children and the mother were left in sometimes unsafe environments, in council estates with lots of hostile neighbours, in a situation where the mum doesn't speak English, so the kids are having to do a lot of the parental work that they shouldn't be doing. So I think it was a very brutal time, and one that lots of young men were raised within. But I don't also just want to pin all of the blame on the men, because I think they were completely out of their depth.
I think it's very difficult to think, but I think my understanding of conceptualizing home, whether it's a physical or emotional, I think it's both. If you ask me now, where is your home? I grew up in a region called Bacol, and a city, a small town called El Berde. I know it very well. I still dream about it, still. And I haven't been there for almost 35 years. So I think it's more about emotions, more about memory, more about culture. So if I see someone, I've got a friend now who's from El Berde there, Abdurrashid, where is he? Abdurrashid, yeah. He's over there, Abdurrashid, yeah. He's from same town, actually. We grew up in the same neighborhood. So I remember, so whenever I see him, I feel like from El Berde. So I have that sense of connections. So I think the definition is about, not only, you're right, it's not only physical, but it's about memory as well. It's about memory, it's about the schooling, it's about the culture, the language, it's about the connections. My own family's home, it's not El Berde, it's a different place. Although El Berde is still my own family still, but I have another place to call home, but I don't call that. So it's about connections. It's not about birth as well, it's about the emotions and the memory. And that's why I said, my children will say UK. They will say Bromley. Bromley is where they were born, Bromley, Kent. But for me, Bromley, Kent is completely foreign. And I've been in Bromley, Kent almost 25 years now. It's a completely foreign. Same house, same place, same road, same workplace. My workplace is not that even far from Bromley. So, but I don't call it. Every day it's uniquely foreign to me. Why? Because El Berde is where my emotion is connected, where my links is connected. If you want to.
I think there can be an issue when you're raised from a young age somewhere, that you don't really belong to the place that your family come from, and you don't really belong to the place that you've arrived in. And I think, I don't know, maybe it's not, I don't know if that's a problem. I don't know if, when I think of home as well, I think of all of the tribalism and nationalism that's attached to it. And that's something I find very off-putting. I never want to feel like home is somewhere that makes me kind of blind and a bit stupid and uncritical. And you see that happen a lot. And it's young people in Britain continuing tribal arguments from Somalia, Somaliland. That's an insanity. It's a real insanity, but that's the kind of indoctrination about what home is.
Even global leaders do that. Sure.
Yeah, but it's probably more disturbing when it's someone who's 15,
Yeah.
16, and has no experience of the conflicts that maybe have driven those attitudes. Has never been even. So I'm now kind of drifting in this place where I'm not passionately describing Britain as home, but I also don't spend enough time in Hargeisa to ever call it home.
Yeah.
So you're neither here nor there?
Maybe.
Floating around.
Maybe.
we could spend the whole evening talking about this because I think,
Yeah.
I mean, home. I wrote a book called "This Place Will Become Home." So, but I mean, home is very often very situational. So, where are you all going to? Going home to a house, to a room, to
Yeah.
whatever it is. But then maybe home is also where your people, where
Yeah.
your culture, you know, where people speak your language, where your family comes from, or maybe it's. Yeah, the place you've lived for the most of your life. I've lived in London for now 23 years. I don't really feel that it's home.
Really.
But, and it's longer than I've lived anywhere else. But tomorrow I'm going to New York, and that feels like going home. So,
It's also where you share ideals or outlook in life.
Yeah.
For example, going to America, I feel also at home because I share a lot of things like, I mean, liberty, you can reinvent yourself, start again,
Yeah.
have your own freedom of business, things like that. So it's also about the values, intellectual side, not just emotional. Maybe.
yeah. But belonging is very important, isn't it? I mean, maybe just to kind of finish up, whether you feel at home or whether you feel accepted and supported in the place that you are is really important. And I think, Nuur, your work certainly speaks to that, the importance of acceptance within the family, of being supported, but being supported within the community, and whether it's home or it's something else, is just a sense of well-being, that you're not always looking behind your back and worrying about what might happen around every corner. And that worry leads to huge amounts of anxiety and helicopter mothering and maybe helicopter fathering in some cases too. But, you know, I think that's a concern, and I think, Nadifa, your work kind of also deals with these questions of feeling out of place in some ways in different areas.
And not necessarily rejecting it.
No, but having to navigate it, and that leads to a sense of anxiety and a sense of challenge. And there's a lot of raw material to work on fiction with that kind of a sense of displacement, even while one's in place. But maybe in that end, I'm sure we could continue on. I'm going to bring an end to the formal part of this evening, but if you want to come and speak to Nuur and Nadifa for a few minutes, I'm sure they'll stick around for a bit.
Jan.
But thank you so much to everyone for coming. Thank you to Nadifa and Nuur
Thank you.
Thank
for
you, Laura.
sharing this evening with
Thank you,
us.
Laura.
Thank you to Uba and Ayan for once again hosting Somali Week in a fantastic way. And I hope that you will continue to participate in all the other events that are going on this week.